Rand Paul apparently is in some trouble, according to Politico. They do an article on him. Someone would describe it as a hatchet job about how his staff is infighting. Some are leaving for other campaigns, and they don't have enough money. And so this is the kind of a typical piece that comes out in Washington, and now people are starting to declare Rand Paul done. It's over. It's over. Dude, it's July of 2015. Okay, we're not even in 2016. We're not anywhere near 2016. This is the same stuff they did to John McCain. Oh, it's over. It's over.
Remember that?
He doesn't have enough money. His staff is in disarray. I mean, you could almost line up the two articles and they'd match up almost word for word. Okay, so now, as you can tell, I'm not really buying it. Now, do I think there's infighting? Of course, there's infighting in every single one of these campaigns. Am I a friend of Rand Paul? Hell no, right? And so if there's infighting in the Rand Paul campaign and he can't do his flat tax from the Flat Earth Society and give away billions and trillions of dollars to the rich, I'm not going to shed a tear. But I'm just trying to keep it real as to what is happening and what isn't happening and why this guy's getting thrown under a bus, okay? So now when you go to why, like what's the biggest problem with this campaign? And that's where we get into the irony. So Politico explains, easily the biggest problem confronting Paul is his fundraising or lack thereof. So we found the crime, the original sin. The original sin is he's not kissing enough ass of the donors. Now you think, wait a minute. Now they didn't exactly say that. They said he's not raising enough money. All right, then let's be more specific. Politico continues. Those close to Paul say there's a simple reason for his lack of success. He's simply not willing to do the stroking and courting that powerful donors expect. He's downright allergic, they say, to the idea of forging relationships with the goal of pumping people for dough.
Jesus.
I mean, and they say it with, there's no wink, there's no irony, there's no, yes, you know, they say it like, oh, this guy won't blow the donors.
Yes.
That's why he's not fit to be president. This is amazing. It's Alice in Wonderland. The world is upside down. He won't stroke the donors. Like he won't plow. He won't let them plow him or pump him.
Jeb Bush will blow them, but he won't kiss on the lips.
But that's his strength.
That's his strength. That's not his weakness. But they view that as like, this guy's done in Washington. This guy, I mean, okay, let's get into more specifics.
That's why
it's not just two sentences. The whole article is about this.
That's why, but that's why people liked his dad, because he didn't seem like he could be bought.
Yeah.
Like he was going to say things that would get him booed at a debate because he believed in him and he had principle, and that's what they're supposed to be. Their libertarian streak is, and they're not supposed to be beholden. I mean, this whole thing is backwards.
Yeah. So they explain.
It's Politico, weird.
And it's Politico. That is weird.
If you don't know Politico, as most of you don't, obviously, it's a very establishment publication in Washington. They get a ton of money from corporate interests, who then they happen to write very positive articles about. Wild coincidence. Wild coincidence.
After the stroking that they do.
Yeah, and the establishment is front and center at Politico. And the establishment doesn't like Rand Paul. I don't like Rand Paul for other reasons, but they don't like him because they're like, he won't even stroke the donors.
Yes.
Okay, so here comes a specific example they have. At times, Paul has simply seemed uninterested in playing the donor game. This is supposed to be a negative. Okay.
Uninterested.
Okay, earlier this year, the senator had agreed to speak at Dialogue Retreat, a gathering hosted by Orrin Huffman, a prominent investor with deep ties in the well-heeled Silicon Valley world. Well-heeled. Again, like positive. That's like, oh, they're well-heeled. Why didn't he stroke them? Okay.
They went to finishing school.
They did, indeed. But just before he was to appear at Hoffman's, Paul pulled out, what is with all the sexual references here?
That's
all right.
No kidding.
So that he could take his family on a spring break excursion to Florida.
That dick.
Paul's aides were aghast. They were aghast, realizing they'd missed an opportunity to cultivate the very type of donors likely to be receptive to his small government philosophy. And I mean, the last irony is wonderful too. You see, we had a donor who was going to give you a lot of money to corrupt you so that you can give him favors to the government. And that's why he really believes in your small government philosophy. And since you wouldn't stroke him for those favors that he wants, well, then he no longer believes in your small government philosophy. Oh, wait a minute. I thought this was all ideological. They were just giving the money because they happened to agree. Wait, if they really believed in what Rand Paul says, who cares if he showed up to your retreat or didn't show up to your retreat?
Right. You want to support him.
Yeah, don't you want to support him because of his ideas? And they're criticizing him. They're like, he put his family above the donors.
The donors.
He was
with
human.
a straight face, like that's that's like, can you believe he had the nerve to do that? This guy running the family values party actually cared about his fucking family.
Yeah.
So Politico finally found a specific guy that they're like, well, this guy could still sponsor him. So let's see how it goes here. He's blown it with a lot of the people that matter. They're well-heeled, rich.
The well-heeled.
Okay. So they found one guy, Andrew Beal, a Texas banker, who has a reported net worth of $11 billion. Beal, a poker-playing libertarian, has contributed $50,000 to his super PAC supporting Paul and may give far more. So the reason I read you this is because what we have turned this country into is the Hunger Games. So they're in the arena, and they've got to, kiss up to the people who could send them something inside the arena that could help them in the Hunger Games, right? And so they have to go and appeal to the top donors. And they're like, oh, there's still one guy out there who has $11 billion who could then change an election. By the way, 50,000 is nothing. I mean, if he wants, he can give Rand Paul $100 million, which would be nothing to him. And this whole election is completely different.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he'd have more money than Jeb Bush when you take his current money and add it to the $100 million, and Rand Paul would be the leader. You know why? Because we're not deciding this election. Just a couple of rich donors, through the decisions they make on who to fund, are deciding the elections. Will it be Rand Paul, who's the Republican candidate, or Jeb Bush, or Ted Cruz? We're not going to decide. The funders are going to decide. You think you're making that call? No. Your guy's going to run out of money. Even if you love him and he's got an excited base and he's doing all the right things and he has all the right ideas and he's the most conservative guy on the planet, if he doesn't have money, he doesn't have a staff. He can't open up a headquarters in New Hampshire or Iowa. He'll have no money by the time he gets down to South Carolina. He can't get people out to vote. He can't run ads. He can't get his message out. And he'll be done for. The way we have set up this insane system, if only you kiss the ass of the donors and you get one of these guys to send you something into the arena to give you a fighting chance, then you're in the competition and you're among the few who have been selected by our overlords to possibly represent us.